Hi, this is Hugh Culver, and in this short video, I want to talk about making decisions. And in particular, I want to talk about when you have to make a tough decision and it really seems difficult to decide which one is better than the other. And so when I'm doing this for myself or when I'm working with other clients, what I'll often do is I'll create a really simple matrix, and that's what I've created for you today. So I wanted to walk you through how I use this matrix, and I call it my 1 hour decision mashup. It takes about 1 hour to go through it and to create it, and then the total of about 1 hour to actually complete it. So it's pretty straightforward. I think you'll understand how it works pretty quickly. I am using Excel to create it just because there's a little bit of math involved, and it's just a lot easier to do it in Excel because it automatically does the formulas for me. So I'll show you really quickly how I've designed it here, and I think you'll see the real value of it. So let's suppose that in this case, I want to decide between doing an ebook, for example, because I have friends that have done them and they've been really successful and they've made them some money, and it's a really good residual income, but also it's a really great promotion, and maybe I'm thinking that's what I want to do. And I want to do webinars because I know that certainly Hugh is all over. He loves webinars, and so I think maybe I should love webinars, and it's a great way for me to stay in touch with my clients. Or maybe I want to go create an online course where I'm going to actually put something that could be done on video or it could be audio. It could even just be a written program, but I want to put it online so that people can access it and I can actually sell it at a distance, so I don't actually have to always be live. Or maybe I want to put on public training. What I mean by public training events is that these are ones that I actually organize myself. So I put a date on the calendar, I book a venue, I do all the marketing, and I encourage people to come in and pay for this event, and then I get the revenues. Maybe I want to sell CDs. Maybe I want to put more of my energy into keynotes, or maybe I want to really strengthen or develop a brand new coaching program. So I have all these great options. Well, each one of these sounds pretty good. Some of them are much more marketing focused. So for example, the webinars are probably more marketing focused. Although you can charge money, I have colleagues that do that very successfully, but it's probably more marketing focused. Some of them are much more revenue driven. So for example, certainly coaching and keynotes and CD sales are more revenue driven. But it's hard to decide because, first of all of them sound good. You probably have evidence of all of them being successful for colleagues of yours, and all of them are going to require some kind of effort, investment of time and energy. So that's where this simple little matrix comes in. So what I've created is a matrix that has across the down the left-hand side, obviously it has all of my options. So pretty simple. I've put in the options that I want to consider. And the really neat thing with this matrix is, of course, you can just create options as you want them, and you can change them as you go. And then across the top, what I've put in is, let's see, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 what we call metrics, or 5 ways of valuing each one of these decisions. So for example, one question I'm going to ask myself is, does this option generate high revenue? In other words, for the amount of effort I put in, am I actually going to potentially make good margin? So for example, we know that an ebook is never going to make as much money as, say, a keynote, whereas coaching is going to make a lot more money than CD sales, etc. Is there a low startup cost? So that's one of my concerns, is that I don't want to be spending a fortune before I actually get going. Well, certainly I know in terms of online courses, boy, when I created my first online course, years ago, it was a small fortune that I had to pay to create this course, and then it was very quickly outdated. Well, fortunately nowadays, that's not the case. So I might be able to actually have a very low startup cost now to create an online course, which is amazing, as opposed to, for example, the risk that's associated with taking public training, where I actually have to book my own venue. So, or perhaps the ebook, or certainly a book, would have a lot more startup costs because I have to hire people to help me to finish that book. I have to hire editors and graphic designers. What about how fast I can get to revenue? How important is that in terms of how fast, So for example, keynote businesses tend to take a little bit longer to develop. You have to build a reputation. It's the market is not everybody is the ability to hire a keynote speaker, whereas coaching is much faster to revenue because it's a one-on-one sales process. It's a much lower dollar amount that you're talking about. I mean, even though it still is a significant money, it's nowhere near a keynote. So I could probably start to earn money faster through coaching. Is there a high market demand for this? And is there low competition? So I've decided that all of these are important. Okay, but how important are all of these? You see, they have different values to me. So, for example, I might think that actually it's more important for me to have high revenue long term. And I don't mind a little bit of startup cost. Or, I feel that in the niche that I'm in, I'm not really too concerned about competition because, either they're just they're too generalized and they don't serve my market in the same way I do, or I feel that I've got something that's completely different from what my competition is offering. So each one of these metrics has a different value to me. So one of the first things that I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put a value on these metrics. So let's do that right now. I think that in terms of high revenue, this is actually really important to me. So on a scale of 0 to 10, I'm certainly going to give this a 9 because I believe that at the end of the day, it's one of the things I'm going to be looking at the most, and it's going to make the most difference. On the other hand, low startup cost, I actually feel that I could probably be willing to invest for the long term. So, for example, I might be willing to go and get some training to learn how to be a better keynote speaker. Certainly, I might be willing to invest in getting help to create a really good ebook so it looks very professional. So, low startup cost is important, but I'm probably going to give it more like more like a 5, or maybe I'll give it like actually, I think a 4. I'm willing to take a bit of risk. Fast time to revenue is very important to me, though. So I'm going to give that at least a 7. High market demand is really important to me. I mean, I don't want to mess around, so I'm going to give that a 10. But low competition, I'm not too as concerned. I'm going to give that a 4. There you go. So now what I've got is I've got a percentage. So you can see that right here. So I have a percentage for each metric. So in other words, each one of these has a slightly different value to me. Low startup cost and low competition are the least important to me, whereas high market demand and high revenue are more important to me. Okay, great. So now what do I do? Well, now I have to go through each one individually, each one of these metrics individually, and I have to actually start to assess, well, what do I think each one of these, ebook, for example, how do I think it will perform on these 5 metrics? So let's do that together. So I think an ebook, as far as high revenue, not really. A lot of ebooks sell for $1.99 to $3.99. So I'm going to give it sort of maybe like a 4, actually. Low startup cost, relatively, it is low startup cost, probably 5. Fast time to revenue, yes, it's true, but you still have to write the darn thing. So I'm going to give that probably like a 3. High market demand, absolutely. I'm going to give that probably an 8. Low competition, well, I think that I could come up with something that's pretty unique. So as far as low competition, I think it actually scores really well. I'm going to give it also an 8. Let's look at webinars. Well, I actually think that webinars are not really a revenue maker. I'm going to do them for free as a promotion. So I'm going to give that of course, it generates revenue as a spinoff, but I'm going to give that a 1. Low startup cost is really low. So I'm going to say that that's probably a 10. Well, actually, no, I have to reserve some space on, for example, a hosting program. So I'm going to have to get I'm going to have to rent, have a subscription to something like, I'm going to have to rent a subscription to either Meeting Burner or Instant Teleseminar or something like that. So I'm going to give it probably an 8. Fast time to revenue, nope, I don't think it's going to perform well there. It is a promotion after all. High market demand, yeah, I'd say that they are. And low competition for what I do, I think it actually is going to perform really well. So I'm going to give that a high score. Let's do the third one here, online course. Yes, I think that you could probably produce some pretty good revenues with that. Low startup cost, definitely not. I'm going to give it like a 2. There's a lot involved in that. Well, maybe with the new technology, maybe a 3. or a 4 because a lot of this stuff is less expensive. So you could, for example, use ScreenFlow, which I'm using right now for this, which is, a $100 program, and with a few other tools and subscriptions, you could probably create an online course for less than $300. Actually, you have to still go out and market it, but you could probably create it. So I'm going to give it a fairly good score, but there are still some hidden costs. Fast time to revenue. I would say relatively fast if you already have a list, but it's not going to be the same as a keynote, for example. So I'm going to suggest that it's maybe a 6. High market demand for an online course? I don't think so. I mean, of course, in certain pockets, it's huge. So a lot of industries rely on these exclusively. A lot of colleges do. But as far as private enterprise going out and trying to sell, I'd say it's more like a 4. Low competition. I feel confident about that. I'm going to give it a 9. And so what you do is you continue on and you start to fill in this matrix. Okay, so what I've done is I've just filled in the rest of the numbers here so that we can start to see how this actually pans out. So again, this is very subjective, and so a lot of the numbers that I'm choosing, so for example, under revenue potential, is very much really just a bit of guesswork. But what's important is that it's actually accurate relatively. In other words, when I look down this list of what has the most potential for revenue, an ebook being a 4 out of 10, that's actually pretty accurate when I start comparing it to webinars, which are really not money-making ventures, or unless you charge for them, of course. They're more actually outgoing content marketing, whereas an online course, if it's successful, has the potential for much more revenue. So in other words, these numbers are actually quite accurate when you consider that, relatively speaking, you've used the same sort of judgment process in order to come up with those numbers. So let's look at how this actually pans out as far as overall results. So what you can see, looking at the right-hand side here, and just to be clear where these numbers come from. So this number 5.6 is very simply, it's each one of these numbers, 4, 5, 3, 8, being multiplied individually by the appropriate percent at the top. So for example, this number 5.6 is actually calculated as 4 times 0.26, which is the percentage of value that you put on revenue. So it's 4 times 2.6 plus 5 times, so it's plus 5 times 0.12. Okay, so you get the idea. So it's each one of these numbers multiplied by its the value that you've put on each one of those metrics. So, and then when you add it up, it comes to 5.6. So when we look down this list, it looks like that the number one best alternative in this case is going to be coaching. Well, that kind of makes sense because coaching has potential to create high revenue right away because, really you just need to get one client and suddenly you're making revenue with very, very little cost. It has relatively low startup cost because, again, it's just really your time. Of course, there's the cost of certification, et cetera, and maybe perhaps there's a practicum involved. But once you get established, there's very low startup cost after that. Very fast timed revenue because, again, you can start to make revenue off of, initially 1 or 2 clients. And there's always a high market demand for coaching and, relatively low competition, especially if you have a niche. So coaching seems to have a very high ranking. And then following that is keynotes, which makes sense because keynotes, are going to be rated very well as far as revenue potential and fairly low startup cost. And you can fairly quickly, if you have any modicum of success, fairly quickly turn into revenue. So as we go down the list, we have coaching as number 1, we have keynotes as number 2, we have public training as number 3, and then we have, tied for number 4 would be online courses and CD sales. And then we go into number 5, which is going to be our ebooks and our webinars. Now, the reality of it is once you get these numbers established, which is a really good place to go because it gives you a bit of a pecking order, if you will, or a priority, the reality is that what you're going to do is you're going to now start to assess them in terms of your willingness to actually invest into those sorts of options and what your maybe your intuition or your gut says about those options. So for example, coaching, it looks like it's going to be able to produce revenues, but the reality is that it's not very scalable. In other words, you only get paid for every hour that you put in. So you may say, well, that's great, and I'm going to do that as part of my revenue stream, but it's not going to be my sole strategy. Keynotes, you say, actually long-term are going to produce a better revenue return for my time. So that's going to be one of my main strategies. And you say, well, number 3 was actually public training, but you feel like it's too much risk. So you say, well, actually, I'm not actually going to take that one. But what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to start to experiment with CDs, and I'm going to I will start to experiment with CDs, so we'll put an arrow there. We'll start to experiment with CDs, and I'm going to start to invest in online courses. So there you go. I call it the 1 hour mashup because it takes about 1 hour to go through it. You can reuse these templates over and over, obviously. And I just find it's a really great way when I've got lots of decisions to make to actually put some hard numbers to them and to actually help to make that decision. Okay, hope you find that helpful, and we will see you on the next video.